Hello there, I'm Ishiro, and today I'm teaching you how to win at Weiss Schwarz. If you're a beginner or you just played a few games, this video is made for you, and if you're already an experienced player, it's always good to get a reminder from time to time. So there's only one way to win at Weiss, pretend that Doctor Strange doesn't exist. It's to put your opponent at level 4. Contrary to other card games, you deal damage even if you don't have more power than your opponent's characters. Because of this rule, doing damage is more important than dealing with the board. But be careful, never dealing with the board can also be dangerous. I'll be explaining why later. So, when you are trying to deal damage, there's always a concept of risk and reward. The more souls you attack for, the more your opponent could take, but the more they are likely to cancel. So 1 damage is likely to pass, but not super impactful, but 5 damage can be huge and turn over the game, but is very unlikely to pass. So most of the time you'll aim to do 2 or 3 damage, likely to pass, and still impactful. You get extra souls either from climaxes, that typically give you plus 1000 power and an extra soul to all of your characters, and from direct attacks, when there are no characters in front of yours. So these two are crucial when you're at level 0 or level 1, where most of the characters have only 1 soul. But you are not the only one attacking, the opponent is also attacking you. How to make sure that you cancel more than them? Let me introduce you to the concept of compression. Compression is the number of climaxes in your deck divided by the number of cards in your deck, which gives you your chances to cancel. For instance, if you have 4 climaxes in 28 cards, that's a 1 out of 7 chance to cancel, so not a lot. But when you have 4 climaxes in 8 cards, now that's a 1 on 2 chance to cancel. So if your opponent is attacking for 2 damage, you are super likely to cancel. Why is it important? Because the more you cancel, the more time you have to get your game plan. When you start the game, the first deck is the worst one by far. So you draw 5 cards in your starting hand, and let's assume you didn't draw any climaxes. You are on 8 climaxes out of 45 cards. That's only a 17% chance to cancel. Then, during your first 3 turns, as you're going to play, your climaxes are going to go all over the place. You're going to draw them in your hand, you're going to trigger them into your stock, you're going to cancel with them, you're going to mill them with effects, etc. So your objective is to make as many as possible go to the waiting room, so that when you refresh, they go back into the deck. So for that, you need to play effects to get them from other zones into the waiting room. So cards that make you discard, to get rid of the climaxes you don't need. You can also just play those climaxes and they go to the waiting room at the end of the turn. And you also need to remember when you triggered on the previous turn and use effect to pay stock until you pay their climax. So for instance, if you triggered on your second attack, then on the next turn, you want to pay 2 stock in order to pay that climax. Don't wait for too long, because the longer you wait to pay a climax that's in your stock, the harder it gets to get it out, as every turn you're going to have 3 new stock on top of it. On your first refresh, you should aim to have 7 climaxes out of 28 cards. That would be a 1 out of 4 chance to cancel, which is decent, and better if you can. So that's the basic ideas behind compression. Now let's go into the second big parameter behind winning in Weiss Schwarz, resource management. So you have 2 types of resources in Weiss Schwarz. Your hand, from which you play characters and climax to attack your opponent, and your stock that you pay to play effects and level 3s later in the game. Let's start with the end. So here, let's do a bit of math. You want to do 3 attacks every turn, if possible, to deal damage and build stock for your effects. Assuming your opponent is going to reverse all 3 of your characters, it's like you go -3 in hand size every turn, because you played 3 cards from your hand. During your draw phase you draw 1, and during the clock phase you can clock 1 to draw 2. So that's plus 2 cards in your hand. So if you draw 2 cards every turn, but you have to play 3 cards, you lose 1 card in hand every turn. And 2 cards if you play a climax. Now, you have a starting hand of 5 cards, so if all you do is play vanilla cards and attack 3 times every turn, in 5 turns you just run out of cards. That's why your attacks need to give you back extra cards to compensate. So, how do you make extra cards in hand? Well, there are 4 ways. The first one is to convert your stock into hand. For that you have effects like Brainstorm, where you pay 1, you raise a character, you flip cards from top of your deck, and you get extra cards based on the number of climaxes you revealed. You also got effects like, when you reverse your opponent character, you can pay 1 and salvage 1. All kind of things that say, pay stock, make hand. The number 2 way to make hand is to have characters that actually survive. So for instance, if your character had too much power and your opponent wasn't able to reverse it, That's one less character you need to play on the next turn. So that's technically one more card in your hand, right? So playing characters with a lot of power can be a strategy to make hand. Number 3 would be to use a combo climax. The vast majority of decks in Weiss Schwarz run a combo climax on level 0 or level 1 that gives you extra cards. So if you go back to the previous math, where I said that if you play a climax you go -2 every turn, now let's say you're playing a combo climax where when you attack, you get an extra card. And you got 3 of this character. So that would be a +3 in hand. So instead of ending your turn with -2 cards compared to the start of your turn, you would be at +1. So 1 extra card than when you're starting your turn. So being able to use your combo climax and use it on multiple turns during the game is super important. And lastly, the 4th method is to trigger a climax that give you an extra card. You have the salvage trigger, you have the gold bar trigger, even the book trigger, the bounce trigger. This is why all of these climax triggers are so popular, because at least if you're not going to cancel with these climaxes, you still get cards out of them. Also, ideally at level 2, we want to stop clocking during your clock phase to not take too much damage. So, get as many cards as possible. But don't get any cards. If you have 7 cards in hand, but all of them are level 3 that you cannot play, it's the same as having 0 cards in hand. So first in Mulligan, at the beginning of the game, keep only level 0s, and maybe your best level 1 cards, like your combo or your climax for it. Then, as you're going to play the game, always be ready to level up and to not level up. That means you keep characters from your current level, so that you can attack if you cancelled, and you get some characters for your next level to be ready to play them already, if you took the damage. Now let's move on to the second important resource, the stock. So most level 0s and level 1 don't require to pay any stock to play them, but level 2 and level 3s are going to ask you 1 or 2 stocks. You want to start your level 3 with at minimum 7 stock. This way you can pay for 3 level 3s, and you have an extra stock to pay for an effect. Of course, this depends on your deck. Some level 3s can give you back stock, or some combos are very expensive and want you to have 8 or 10 stock, but for most decks, 7 is a good line. So once again, it's time for math. Let's say you attack 1 time on turn 1, then you attack 3 times on every other turn. If you never pay any stock, on turn 5, you would have 13 stocks. So if you need 7 stock for your level 3s, you know that you have 6 spare stocks that you can use for effects all over the game. Of course, this will depend on the scenario. Some games are going to last longer than 5 turns, some games you're going to trigger a lot of climaxes and need to pay them, and some games you won't need that much stock and you're going to have extra compression. On top of attacking, there are some effects that make extra stock, and these are super good. One of my favorite ones are the level 0's utilitaries that go to stock when your opponent plays the climax. But don't be fooled and build your strategy entirely on building stock. You need to make sure that you keep up with hand first. So, why is resource management so important? How is it related to putting my opponent at level 4? Well, this can be explained by what I called the snowball effect. So, when your characters survive, they can attack again, so you don't need to play new cards from hands, you gain extra in size. When you have enough hands, you don't need to clock anymore, so you're not getting closer to your death. When you also don't trigger climaxes, then you don't need to pay any stock. So you get more and more compressed, as you have more cards that are not climaxes that don't need to return to your next deck. When you are more compressed, you're going to cancel more, and when you cancel more, you have more time to prepare your game plan. And as the game goes on, it won't be super hard to improve your compression, because you're going to have a lot of hands, a lot of stock, a board filled with characters, so this kinda creates a virtuous circle that you want to get in and stay in. Because as long as you have time, you'll be able to play your effects to get more in size, you'll be able to build more stock, so you are going to have a stronger level 3. Sooner in this video, I told you to not totally ignore your opponent's board. This is why. Because if you don't reverse their character, if you don't contest the board in any way, they're going to enter the virtual circle too. So that's why you want to invest some effort to have enough power to reverse your opponent's characters. Now, in practice, there are 3 types of games in Weiss Schwarz. Number 1 is the good game. You're able to triple combo climax every turn, you hit with your brainstorms, you stop clocking early, and you cancel a lot. Everything is fine. So in this type of games, you have time to watch what your opponent is doing, and your problematic is going to be, how do I beat my opponent if they also have a good game? What are the keys in the matchup? Do I have an explosive finisher that can beat their compression? Can I stop their snowball effect somehow? This is what you're going to think. And also, think about if there's a way to make sure you don't lose, even if you trigger flick climaxes at some point. The second type of game is the average game. So, you get 1 or 2 copies of your key cards, not triple but still good enough. You just need to pay 1 or 2 stock per turn, and at one point you're going to have a problem, like not drawing the right climax, or being out of climaxes, etc. And so in the average game, you need to solve your problems before they snowball. I'm going to come back on how to solve the most common problems later in the video. And your second priority in the average game is to make sure that your opponent is not having a good game, that they don't enter the virtuous circle. And the third type of game is a bad game. So you don't fight the cards that give you more hand, you struggle or you fail to line up 3 attacks every turn, or your opponent attacked and everything passed, you skipped a level. In this kind of cases, forget about the cool gimmick of your deck. Go back to the basics and line up attacks. As long as you focus on damage, there's a chance that your opponent takes a level and that you're back into the game. When you are behind, it's very hard to fix your compression, so I would advise you to prioritize resource management over improving your compression. At least make sure that when you are at level 3, you're going to do the best you can. Okay, maybe some of these advices sounded a bit too general, so we're going to go into the game plan level by level. Keep in mind these are advices for the Rush archetype, which is easily 80% of the Weiss Schwarz decks, so check my video on deck archetypes if you want to know more about the other ones. Level 0. This is a moment where both players have the least resources. We don't have any stock yet, we just have 5 cards in hand, so the priority is to increase your resources. So having some level 0s that are hard to remove, or that have effects to convert stock into hand, or that have effects that give you extra hand size without paying any stock. If possible, you also want to find your handpick tools, so the cards that help you look for the characters that you want in your deck or waiting room, so that you can prepare your level 1. At level 1, what you want to do is rush your opponent before their first refresh. Remember, this is still their first deck, so the deck where they are the least compressed. So it's the timing when they are most likely to take. So don't hesitate to just slam a climax if you can afford it regarding your hand size. At the same time, you also want to reach your first refresh. So use effects to mill your deck and reach a decent compression. This is also the moment where you want to stabilize in resources, so have at least 3 stocks and 6 in hand to have enough options. At level 2, this is usually the timing where you want to get the snowball, when you want to enter the virtuous circle. Most decks are going to use early plays that heal, in order to correct the bad luck that could happen at level 1, as well as trying to contest the board, trying to answer your opponent's early plays. As you're doing that, you also want to set up for your level 3, so get your finisher, make sure you have enough stock for it, and maybe keep the climax for it. And level 3, this is the time where you finish your opponent, usually with a climax combo. It's good to know in advance, okay, if I want to triple combo, I need 7 stock, and if I have more stock, I also have another card for damage. This could be Burn for Main Phase, or a decompression tool like Fumio. This way, you know what to target, and you can act accordingly on level 2. If you see that it's not possible to finish your opponent, either because they are too compressed or too low on damage, try to heal as much as possible, and to keep a decent compression despite paying your stock for your level 3s. For instance, you could brainstorm and refresh right before paying 6 stocks for your level 3s, in order to make sure those 6 cards are not going back into your deck. So this is the usual game flow of a game. Now, what to do in tough situations? Well, I have a list of problems in mind, but you're going to face a lot the longer you play. First one, I'm out of climax, so in other terms, I'm free. If my opponent attacks, I'm sure to take them all. So while it's your turn, you want to use as many milling effects as possible to refresh, in order to put back climaxes and cancel. Ideally, you want to end your turns with 1 card in the deck. This way, at the end of the turn, the climax you played goes into the waiting room, and you know there's only 1 potential damage, and if your opponent is attacking for 2, you might even cancel after the refresh. Another problem is that you didn't find your combo climax. When this happens, you need to be careful with your resources. Maybe pay more stock to try to get extra cards, or try to find value and attack with your level 0s, but were stuck in your hand. If this happens too often, maybe check your build to include the plan B if you don't find your climax, or increase the consistency of your plan A to find your characters. Another common thing, draw phase. You draw a climax, you clock, and you just drew 2 more climaxes. So now you are not compressed anymore, and you drew 3 cards that you cannot play. The first thing to check is that if you are really compressed, maybe you should not have clocked. You should have just gone for a brainstorm knowing that you're going to hit. And if you aren't in the wrong, then I try to make sure that I have at least one unfixed card, like a discard 1, search 1, already in my hand for the next turn, to cover for this scenario. This way you can like instantly discard the climax and turn it into a real card. And you can just play one of the other climaxes you drew. Another way to ruin your compression, during your attack phase, you trigger 3 climaxes. If you're close to refresh, consider to use the Anchor Free rule. So when one of your characters goes into the waiting room, you can anchor, pay 3 stock, to put it back on the stage as rest. You lose 3 stock in the process, because your opponent is very likely to reverse your character on the next turn, but at least you save 3 climaxes that can go back into your refresh. And if you cancel and get an extra turn, you have a turn to remake these 3 stocks. Be wary that this can happen at any deck state. With experience, you'll know the timing to force a refresh, and to mill even if you have a few climaxes left in deck. Now, if you do trigger 3 climaxes during level 3, then F. I hope that you're playing a refresh counter, but sadly, this is one way to lose advice. For one, that can happen in the mid game. So you brainstorm and you hit no climax, and then you use an effect like Akatsuki, check 4 cards from the top of your deck and take a character, and you mill 4 climaxes. So you cannot even take a character, and you just lost an opportunity to get a great brainstorm. So first, skill issue, and second, once it has happened, it's too late. So before playing your effects, you need to figure out what is the worst case scenario. And figure out, is there an order where you can adapt to the worst case scenario. So for instance, you don't hit on the brainstorm, then maybe just don't play the Akatsuki effect, accept to potentially trigger your climaxes to get 3 cards, and if you don't trigger any climax, then great, you have potentially a lot of cancels coming. And lastly, something that can feel a bit unfair, but your opponent kills you from level 2. So this one is complicated. It happens a lot more often because they made finishers recently very powerful, but against some matchups, it's better to actually not help them level up, as their cards are too strong on one particular level. I'm thinking of Kanata Marine in Hololive, where the Kanata combo on level 2 is going to give them a lot of resources, or level 3 for certain decks with great finishers. So one thing that's possible is to side attack your opponent's characters to reduce the damage you do to make sure that they don't level up. This way, they need to make extra efforts to play their level 3s, and you can potentially try to kill them from level 2. This is far from a general rule, so ask more experienced players what you should do in particular matchup and scenarios. So, congratulations, you stayed until the end! You can now win a Weiss Schwarz game, and it's not only because of luck! Next time, we'll be talking about the basics of deck building. So, subscribe if you don't want to miss that, leave a like if you appreciated the video, and I'll see you on the next time. Bye bye!